online summit is happening right now. It's all going all week this week, and they've got pre-recorded videos and live sessions, and it's a free online conference, if you will. So I've been listening to sessions throughout this morning, and so far they've been interesting and pretty good. So if you're looking for that, I can post a link in the chat. Neat resource available this week for free.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that. Cool. It's 12 o'clock and we're going to get started. So we have Gil here, and thanks to Daniel and this partnership with Open Leadership Network. We have people who are interested in open leadership, and they come from Coaching Agile Journeys community. So however you found us, if you want to share your role, if you're an Agile coach or have some other role, we're really curious about that. So I'll be reading some of those and collating those results for Gil as we go through. I encourage you to go to the Open Leadership Network and check out the stuff at Open Leadership Network. I became really interested with the patterns and practices, so you can go and check out these things. They're all open source. And Coaching Agile Journeys is 3 years strong now, and we just really relish our partnership with Open Leadership Network to spread the message of Agile, business agility, and open leadership. And so you've got a couple of co-hosts on, Isaac Garcia, Lori Townsend, and myself. And so Daniel, I know you have to hop off, so before I turn it over to Gil, do you want to share, is there anything else you'd like to share? Daniel Menzick. Let's see if he's here.
Partner today.
Okay, I know he's prepping for a client call. Cool. Okay, well, Gil, I'm going to turn it over to you then. We're so excited to have you here, because I know this is one of the things that we often get pulled in to do in organizations. Even in my company, the word is spreading about people outside of software. How do we do this Agile stuff? And they start reaching out to us, and I know other co-hosts have the same exact challenge as well. So I'm excited to have you here today talking about this really awesome topic. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
All right, it's my pleasure. If I sound funny and sometimes less than excited, it's because I have a head cold. It's not because of the subject matter or being here. So a little bit of background. I have been in Agile since about the year 2000, and I spent most of my time there, in the software arena, right? So software development, IT, product engineering, and so on. And in the last 3-4 years, I would say, I've been noticing a lot of interest outside of software, just like you were saying. So both in my own company, I've been receiving a lot of requests from all sorts of corporate functions and business units and companies that don't do software, can't use any jargon with them, right? But I'm also hearing this from colleagues in the industry. So every time I go to the big Agile conference, for instance, I see the same thing. And the obvious candidates, in a way, are marketing and HR, but this is everywhere. And there is a common denominator. What I'm seeing is that managers are asking for this. It's never their team members, because they don't know about this yet, unlike in software. The managers are asking for Agile, but they don't really know what they're asking for. They don't know how to get started or what to pay attention to. So in that sense, it kind of feels like it was 15 years ago in software. And because I've been involved in that for so long, really what I'm getting is the same experience helping companies transition. And it's given me a chance to refine my process and help people along. And that's really what I want to share with you guys today, right? So how to help non-software people adopt Agile without prescription, without frameworks, without imposing, without any of that. So throughout this talk, we're going to have in our minds, a non-software function or business unit that's interested in trying Agile for their teams. Let's say they've asked you for your help. So we're going to refer to them as your clients, right? Even if you're internal, it doesn't matter. They're still effectively the clients for your support. And we're going to see how to really empower them and support them along the way. Can we ask for anybody who has in fact done that or is currently doing that to just put in a couple words in the chat what sort of functions or business units you're helping? So we just see a few examples here. And I can see the chat here on my screens in the presenter mode. So Heidi, if you could read a few of those out, that would be awesome.
Well, I put in myself marketing and sales. Someone else is posting marketing.
Mm-hmm.
I learning and development, HR
Mm-hmm.
teams, risk and compliance, human resources,
Mm-hmm.
proposition design team who develop life insurance products, facilities management.
Facilities, yes. Anything really exotic?
Well, not if legal. Legal has asked for our help too. So
Okay.
yeah, not unless legal is exotic.
I can tell you the most exotic that has approached me was student housing at a university.
Oh, the most exotic has approached me now that I'm thinking of it is a roofing firm.
Okay. Okay.
That was
So, right. I'm talking to a movie production, sorry, not production, distribution firm, and it's everywhere. Anyway, so here's the thing. In order to help those people adopt Agile, they need to go in this sort of pathway. And I'm going to, explore this pathway with you. So throughout this talk, and if you just quickly look at this, you'll see that there's a lot to do before they ever, launch anything or do anything or have a practice or a process. This is a lot deeper than what we encounter in software, where you could theoretically do with just picking out Scrum or Kanban for a team. Not so outside of software, and I'm going to explore this with you. But there are several reasons for that. And I sort of touched on them earlier. We want people to feel ownership and involvement, right? So they have to be involved in designing their own methods. They definitely need to have a clear understanding of what they're in for. This is not to say that in software and IT, everybody understands Agile perfectly, but at least they're closer to it, let's say. This is still where things are. And people will have concerns, and we need to help them kind of reckon with their concerns, and really to have methods that fit their needs and support systems in place. So as we explore this, we're going to be taking their angle, because that's empowering, right? And our own angle as supporters. Now, to make this concrete for you, all the audience, if you would get in your mind a picture of a group that you would take along this pathway. So maybe it's a group that you already started with or are already working with, like you did in the chat, or maybe a group that you think is kind of starting, and maybe there's been already been a reach out. Ideally, it's in your company. Ideally, they're outside of software, even though this pathway will work for everybody. So just get a picture for this to make this, a bit more, down to earth in a way. So the first thing your client needs to do is to articulate why they're doing this. Now, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people say, oh, we want Agile because it's better, cheaper, faster. Well, I like to say that two of those are lies. And so we need to have a decent business outcome that we're pursuing in order to go this Agile route. So what we have here on the list is just, on the screen is a laundry list of potential Agile benefits. You all know this stuff already. Your client is not going to care about all of those. They're going to care about just one or two. So help them understand, help them articulate, help them say, you know what, that's it. That's why we're doing this. And, this is right. If it's not on the list, help them articulate it, tie it clearly to business outcomes. I haven't mentioned this, but, everything here is going to be in a book. So the book is coming out like next month or so. And, all the detail and stories from the field and patterns and this and that. And one of the stories that I share there is from a coach in Germany who said, 6 months into transforming some non-software group, it was so disheartening to realize that what management wanted was just, more and faster. They could care less for Agile per se. It was just more and faster. And it was just horrible for her. So, we need to make sure that they go at this from the right angle. And Heidi, I think we said that, if people want to just be notified when the book comes out, they can somehow tell us their email?
Yep, I'm pasting a Google Doc with a spreadsheet that people can add their emails to find out.
Yeah, this will not put you on any general mailing list. It's just to let you know when the book is coming out. I mean, it is on Leanpub, but with the real printed paper, we're still that generation. When that comes out, so I can let you know. All right, second step, we need to have a conversation. And at this point, this is only with the manager. The manager has asked for this. We want to make sure the manager understands what he or she is asking for. Later, very soon, we'll involve the team as well. So we need to help them understand that when we talk about a way of working, we mean both the mindset and the tactics, because when they ask for Agile, it's usually because they've seen IT or engineering use it, and it's just the visible stuff. Oh, the team sit together, and oh, they plan like visually like this with notes and whatever, and they meet every day for the status meeting, which of course it's not. And they have all of this stuff. I want that. It seems to work, but the tactics don't matter, right? The tactics don't actually matter. What does matter is how you approach them, and how you approach them primarily is with principles, right? And so if for instance, if your client says, I really want people to sit together. Okay, that's a tactic. Collocation is a tactic. You can ask, okay, so what do you think sitting together would accomplish for people? Well, we know why we want it in Agile. And then we talk about things such as collaboration and transparency and communication. But of course, collocation is not the only way to get that. We might say, oh, there's a demo. Every couple of weeks, we show our work. And you might be asked, okay, so what is that for? Is that for sign off? Is that for, I don't know, for approval? You're saying, no, it's for feedback, right? And for people from the outside who don't know this, just looking at the tactics, they can't always tell what the principles are that drive them, right? Now, also talk about what tactics your client already has in place, and what are the principles that underlie that. And what I see in many places is that some of the principles that guide them, even though they have never made them explicit, have specialists and have handoffs and have approvals, right? So that's how a lot of teams that I've met work. For them, it's just a way of life. It's just how it is. But once we start contrasting Agile and whatever they have at the level of principles, now we can have a more informed conversation about why you would want this or that. So for instance, why would you want to have specialists? Okay, specialists are an important idea, but sometimes they create bottlenecks. Sometimes they do more than they need to do. There's all sorts of considerations there that you won't get to if the conversation is simply about how do I write stories, right? Once you do that, bring it up one level, because we don't pick those principles out of thin air, right? So in Agile, for instance, we say feedback and learning and improvement and defer decisions to the last responsible moment and collaboration and effective first, efficient second. Why do we say all of these things? Well, we say all of these things because there are 4 values that we aspire to. And that's the stuff here on the left. So you say people act in an Agile manner, meaning they apply the Agile principles because that's what they're trying to get to. They want to get to early and frequent value delivery. They want to be adaptive, collaborate with the customers, and they want to be people first. Okay, so client, what do you think you're optimizing for right now? And in all of this, don't use jargon. Don't imply that what they're doing now is wrong or outdated or somehow ineffective or whatever. Just what is it, right? So every group will have its own values. I can't know what they are without talking to them. But what you see here in the right-hand side column is what is typically the value system, right? Getting deliverables right the first time, following industry standards, and putting dates on everything. And usually, where applicable, also putting cost on everything. Now, you as people from technology might say, hold on, I recognize this from Waterfall. And you might say that, right? And I see Isaac nodding here. But you can say Waterfall. The word does not compute outside of software. It didn't compute in software when we only had Waterfall, right? And that was the only thing we used. So don't name this, don't say, just, okay, here's what it is. So now you can have a conversation and say, okay, Mr. Customer, client, if you were to value adaptation more than you did the other things, could that help you get better business outcomes? Now, you need to ask this because realistically, you don't know. You really don't know. You can assume, and in software, it's usually a fair assumption, but outside of software, well, not necessarily, right? Just as an example, when it comes to accounting, for instance, industry standards, kind of matter, right? Finance in general, a little less so. You can be more adaptive, hence the whole beyond budgeting business. But when you're talking about, keeping your books and paying taxes, industry standards kind of help. And the other thing that you need to talk about is all the, is the narrative. Okay, the narrative, the beliefs that people have, all the assumptions that they make. And so on the left, you see some of the Agile beliefs. For instance, teams, assuming that they collaborate and self-organize, can actually get better results than the sum of the individuals, or their manager. We don't or can't have all the answers up front. Well, fair enough. Those are assumptions. We can't actually prove them. We see lots of compelling evidence, but we can also point out examples when they're false. So ask them, okay, what are some of the assumptions you make right now? And it's funny because when you have this type of conversation, you will sometimes draw a blank stare because people are not used to talking this way. But even based on your observations, you can ask, oh, so you have specialists here. Do you assume the tasks should be done by specialists? You can ask that, right? Or for instance, if a stakeholder says, hey, we want something, do you jump, right? The stakeholder says jump, do you jump? So you can ask, right? And this is not a long conversation, but it does bring up a lot of things that people simply never pay attention to. And this is it, because really Agile, again, tactics and mindset, tactics don't matter, mindset does. You can implement the mindset any way you want. And so if they're interested in Agile, we need to talk to them about the stuff on the left. Okay. Now we get with the team. And we start involving them because we want them to be ready, willing, and able. This is the time to deal with willing, right? Ready and able, we'll talk about later. So this is the time for your client to discuss the possibility and in particular, listen to concerns. So again, laundry list on the page of concerns. These are the ones that I included in the book because they keep coming up. So this is what I heard from my clients and as part of the research I did for the book. And you need to be ready with answers. And I want to give you an example. So for instance, the third one, we already follow industry best practices. Why should we change anything? And you know what, if you talk to people, for instance, in HR or in finance or facilities, that is a legitimate question, right? Because they have best practices in their industry and they would be, justified in asking, why should we change anything? So you can talk about, you know what, even best practices evolve. Or you can also say, without using jargon, back in the software industry 20 years ago, we said the same thing. And a few brave people tried differently, and it turned out to be generally better. So we don't know if it would work for you, but it might be worth consideration. Okay. The fifth point, what if Agile applies to only a portion of our work? Totally legitimate question. And you'll see this in a moment because, when we talk about Agile in software, you usually have big teams that work on one big product, and they rarely do, production work or operational work. So they can focus on development for the most part. And so when you bring Agile to a team, it kind of covers most of what they do. This is rarely the case outside of software. Outside of software, they will usually have a bunch of things. Some will be small and recurring. Some will be medium-sized and recurring. Some will be one-off. Some will be projects. And so it is actually legitimate to expect that Agile, if it applies, would apply to only a portion of their work, which means that they would have a method for an Agile method for something, approach for some things, and whatever they have right now for the other things. And that is totally legitimate. So you need to be ready with this and discuss those concerns. Related to the last concern, what if it doesn't work out? The big idea is to treat it as an experiment. So, all of you are familiar with the concept of experiment. We're big on experiments in Agile and so on. But this is like, the whole of Agile is an experiment in this context. And that is totally authentic because you really don't know that it would succeed. I mean, if you brought Agile to, an average software development team, generally speaking, how that it would unfold. So, you don't need to worry too much about experimentation. But outside of it, this is so new. So while we have had some examples, success is not guaranteed. So it's very important to, allay concerns by promising that this is not a binding change. So for instance, you don't go changing roles and titles and compensation or even desks. Okay, so there's that. Now, I said before that the team will do a bunch of stuff. And so you need to help them determine where to try Agile for the first time. Pretty straightforward process here on the page. Basically, you do an inventory of all the major things that they do. in Agile, we like to talk about product, and Kanban, we talk about service. Solution is another thing that we can talk about, but the idea is to already help them think in terms of work that makes a difference, work with outcomes, not just, a pile of tasks, but also look at additional major responsibilities and activities. So for instance, if I were to do this inventory for my own business, as a small consulting firm, I have products such as my books, and I have services such as clients, but I also have business development, and I have course development in marketing and whatever. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't fit under just one bullet point. And you also want to help them distinguish subcases. So for instance, developing a new course is a totally different activity than teaching the same course every 3 months, right? So help them make a list, narrow it down to things that are not too risky, not too big, not too small, right? So they do teach people stuff. It's a learning experiment, but they're also meaningful. If possible, have a large development component. Agile is not exclusively for development, but it shines there. So that would be a good one. So that's like the target for the first experiment. Okay. Now let's see how that target, how appropriate that target actually is to Agile. And so what we need to do now is to frame the work. When I do this with teams, not so much in the creation of the way of working, but when I do this with teams that are like starting a new project or whatever, this is what I would refer to as chartering. You might use briefs or one-pagers, whatever, but these are all the big questions that have to do with the business aspect of the work. And I'm going to demonstrate how you would use this in a non-software case. The example here is an HR team that I worked with at an investment fund. It was 4 people who were, they call themselves talent acquisition. I mean, what we might call recruiting, but that's a fancier name. Anyway, so the work that they picked out of the inventory was to present promising candidates to hiring managers. So I asked them, okay, who's your customers? And of course, the obvious answer is, well, it's the hiring managers. But upon further thought, they realized they have 3 customers, right? So they're listed here on the screen. And this is very important because once you have them, that affects your way of working. It affects what you consider value. It affects what you choose to do and not to do. The next question is, what is the value of that work to the customers and the organization, right? So it's not just, as a hiring team, you fill an open spot. They decided that to them, the value is when they bring somebody great to a position, but the hiring manager invested the minimal amount of time. So that's a criterion, okay? And they also spoke about hiring as affecting culture and all of that stuff. I mean, let me tell you, few teams that I'm aware of ever ask themselves these questions. They just operate on autopilot, which is horrible, right, Isaac? Yeah, I can see everybody nodding. Yes. So what I'm showing you now is in the context of defining a way of working, but you should really do this for every substantial piece of work. Next question: what does success look like? Right. So, for instance, we don't just fill an open spot, right? They integrate well, they perform well, and they stay long term. It's like we say about ourselves as coaches, we work ourselves out of a job. That's kind of it. Okay. Next one: constraints. So constraints will be anything that basically limits your choices in terms of how you get stuff done. Here's what they chose. So identified. So for instance, the first one, this is an important one. They say our customer, the hiring manager, has such busy schedules that what we could make a straightforward process actually stretches out. So again, you need to account for that. It affects your way of working. Now, for many years, when I did chartering with teams, I would only do these. And I would do a couple of other things, which we don't need for today, but especially after writing the Mindset book and realizing that even the same team, even with an Agile mindset, needs to be clear on how they get work done from a mindset level and not just for a tactics level, I've added these 2 questions. So the first one is about values, and then we're going to look at about beliefs. So you need to ask them, which values will maximize the chance of success? Now, you ask this with some people, and again, you'll get a blank stare. So here are 5 different ways you can ask this, right? Now, when you first ask people this question, if they understand you, again, and values in this case, it's like, what's important? They might give you wrong answers such as, deliverables, right? A report is really, really important. Well, no, it's about how we work. Okay, once they get to this point, they might give you what's currently important. So, or what's assumed. So for instance, you might say what's currently important, dates. We got to hit dates, 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 dates. Or they might give you what's assumed. For instance, when I do this with developers, they will usually say efficiency. They assume it, even though it never actually got articulated, or when it did, it was in some passing way. So look, if they're keeping their way of working, you can identify values, but if they want to go to Agile, which means telling a different story, you do need to think about aspirational values. So ask them what should be important to us, right? How could we be different in order to get those things? So here is what the talent acquisition team said. So the 3 values they chose for themselves are to ensure a great candidate experience, to closely collaborate with hiring manager and candidate, and to take a holistic long-term view. That alone is how they want to be. Now, I want to give you a second method, because sometimes doing this with the group is actually really hard. Again, you get the blank stare no matter what you ask. So what I do in this case is I show an inventory. I think I came up with this method. I don't even know. It's so basic. I just refer to it as the inventory method. So I just make a list. And what I put on the list is every value from Agile, so there's 4, and every value from Waterfall, there's 4, every value from Lean, there's 2, there's 1 in Kanban, and I just add other things that I've seen in the industry, like innovation, which is in none of those 4, and keep the regulators happy and whatever, everything that I think will kind of be relevant in the environment, and we just go through the list, and then I ask them, okay, so first one, how important is it? And if they say, yeah, it's important, write that one, so we keep it. And if they say, that's important, but we're not so sure, so I cross it out. And the idea is to get down to a list of 3, 4, 5. That's it, right? So if you cross some out and you're left with more than 5, you review this and you go over the list again until you get 5. And that way you get to some form of consensus. You do need to check it, but you get some idea of what's really going to be important here. Now about beliefs. So similar type of thing. What assumptions are we making? Right? So again, you do this with the client. It's the manager, the team, everybody together, and say, okay, so what sort of big assumptions are we making? Now, again, you will get the present state. By the way, usually eliciting beliefs is actually easier than eliciting values. I don't know why that is, but it just seems to be. Anyway, but as the coach or facilitator, helping them tell a different story, help them figure out which beliefs they might want to question. And you can already see an example, again, from the talent acquisition team. It's the first one, the first bullet point. When I asked them, okay, so what sort of assumptions are you making? And they said, the way we've been here, we've been trying to hire the best people. So of course, there's an assumption there that we should be hiring the best people. And then the director said, but hold on, maybe you should be hiring the right people. And that created a really nice conversation. And they said, okay, so this is how we want to be from now on. Okay. So there's that. So help them try on different beliefs. Just another example, and an example that all of you would know from technology, the assumption that, people will make mistakes, and, we can solve that by, supervision and accountability. And in Agile, we tell a different story, and we say, well, people make mistakes. Yeah, so put them with their peers and have them catch each other. Right? So that's collaboration and self-organization. Those are beliefs. We don't know that either one is right. But in some fields, one seems to have better results than another. Okay. Here are additional questions I use for eliciting beliefs. Again, they're all equivalent. Yeah, it's actually a fun conversation. At the beginning, it feels like pulling teeth, but it's actually pretty interesting. And yeah, I did this recently with a company and they came up with 10 assumptions, each of which could kill their project. So that was like if it's wrong. So that's a lot of fun. Okay. Now you need to look at the lists that you have, the short values list and the beliefs. The beliefs are usually like, 10, 15, maybe. Compare them to the Agile ones. Okay. Okay, I know this is going to sound self-serving, but I don't compare to the manifesto. it's great stuff, but we have added to it over the years. It's 18 years old. So there's a list or in a narrative that I use. That's what I wrote in the previous book. And that's how I approach it also, so it's not software specific. So because, for instance, the manifesto never talked about safety. It never talked about servant leadership. There's a bunch of things that are missing. And that over time, the Agile community has come to realize is actually Agile, but it's just not there. So look at what you know now to be true for Agile. Anyway, so this example is from software, and I'm using it because I'm sure all of you can relate. And when I did this with an IT operations team that part of their work is to push software updates to production, here are the values and beliefs that they came up with. Okay. Now, and by the way, illustrating that took maybe 30 minutes. That's it. So look at this. There is congruence with Agile, but it is not complete. So for instance, team health, definitely congruent with Agile. Minimize turnaround time, definitely congruent with Agile. Correctness, when you deploy to production, better be right. Put the right package in the right place and don't mess anything up. Whereas when you're developing stuff, sometimes good enough and an approximate is realistic. Look at the fourth belief. There's no single obvious customer to talk to. Once they put something in production, everybody is interested. There's no one customer that takes priority. So they couldn't identify a customer to, for instance, prioritize their list. There's no PO here, right? There's a manager, a very smart one, but there's no PO. So there is alignment. Agile does apply, but not 100%. So that's okay. Now, if you find that the alignment is actually poor, then you should go do something else. So Agile is not for you. And I have had clients where they did the analysis and the values and beliefs came up a lot more aligned with Waterfall than they did with Agile. Don't go to Agile. Don't even take practices, because the practices will confuse people if they're used with the wrong mindset. Now, they're still not starting anything. Help them understand it will be a journey, and the journey can go wrong. Here are 4 things that are absolutely necessary. So one is voluntary participation. So we've talked about willing, right? And that's what, in the 3rd step, you talked with the manager and the team, and you looked at concerns. This is a step after. Even if they said yes to experimenting with Agile, and voluntary is not so much the issue, once they execute Agile, they won't execute particularly well if there's not enough safety or trust or respect or transparency. Okay, so these are really preconditions for voluntary participation. So it's not enough to consent to an experiment. You want them to go to Agile and really be willing to execute. I always like to warn people about the experience of change. So I like to use the Satir change model. I learned it 10 years ago. It's golden, very much because it describes how people approach change emotionally and a little bit cognitively. Then I tell people, and that's where I get heretical, don't start with practices, frameworks, or tools, and because that's starting backward. Start with the mindset and tailor your methods. And if you decide that an off-the-shelf is good, then take it, but don't start with it and expect the mindset to follow, because it just doesn't. I don't use the term shuhari with people because nobody knows it, but if they say, oh, I heard about it, I say, please don't do that. Because of this. So here's the deal. All the stuff on the left, okay, this is stuff from, some of it's Scrum, some of it's XP. All of it was designed from the Agile mindset, right? I mean, some of this is really old stuff, but when it was designed, it was for, certain purposes. So if you have an Agile mindset and you do, a daily stand-up, really the point of it is to maximize the team's value output through a regular check-in. However, if you bring those to a traditional mindset, you get basically a daily status meeting, and nobody wants that. Product backlog turns from a list of valuable potential stuff, it turns to a project plan. And the thing is that we see this misalignment happen in 2 ways. One is inside the team, right? And I'm sure all of you have worked with teams where, for instance, some people were very collaborative, always hung together, planned together, and this and that. And you had the two people with the headphones who never talked to anybody else. That's different mindsets. What you also get is the team is in fact aligned on the same mindset, but everybody around it is not, like management or senior stakeholders and so on. And so that's where you say, I don't care how you execute as long as you deliver. And what you get there is essentially, again, a mismatch in mindset. And so you optimize for different things. So I need the clients to worry about this, because this is real and it happens a lot. By the way, so everybody watching this, there is another talk I've done. It's called Practice Does Not Make Perfect. And it's all about, that's where the slide came from. It's really all about what to me is the prime reason that transformations fail. And again, it has to do with not really transforming mindset, but just applying tactics. Okay, they need to prepare for the journey. So choose a good time to get started, because not every time is good. Get managers and stakeholders on board. My go-to technique there is, again, to have a collaborative conversation about why valuing what we want to value is good for business and good for them. So for instance, collaboration and adaptation. I don't need people to buy in to show up to a demo meeting. And I don't want people to buy into Jira or to all this and that. I want people buying in to frequently checking our work together so we can take it different ways. Can we agree to that? It will mean being busy different ways, right? But the mechanics shouldn't matter. There's some team preparation here. I'm sorry, I don't have much time to go into that, but make sure that everybody is in fact readier. And now is actually also a good time to make sure that, you know, the manager you're talking to has a better sense of agile leadership and, you know, servant leadership and all of that stuff. Don't discover this too late. Now is the time to teach people what agile actually means, because so far we've given them very little. So the way I like to do this is with training. It's usually like a day and a half, and this is the stuff I covered there. And the big idea is to train only on mindset and not on framework. So the way I train, there's no prescription, there's no best practices, there's no, you can do whatever you want except for this stuff. It's all about this through experiences and activities, because again, we don't know how it will turn out looking for them. We don't know. So teaching them, for instance, how to do a sprint demo is kind of useless if they're not going to do one. And it's actually not terribly useful outside of software. I mean, some teams use it effectively, but for many teams, it's not. So instead, talk about feedback and getting it frequently. Talk about visualizing the work, breaking it down, and so on. Okay, so this is definitely trainable without a framework. Now, they start designing the initial way of working. And it's initial because it's a series of experiments and continuous improvement and this and that. So they started with picking principles. They've already done the values and beliefs. And as we said, these give rise to principles. So they can take from this list. They can take from anything that they wish to preserve from the current methods that aligns with those chosen values and beliefs, and everything else that looks important. So this is just another follow-up to the example from before. We had the IT operations team that pushes stuff to production, and they valued correctness, right? And some sort of predictability on that front. So for instance, one of their principles was to plan each deployment, right? You know, from a pure agile standpoint, we don't plan deployment much, but for them, they do. On the other hand, they wanted team health and engagement, so they did pick that with empowerment and collaboration and learning from mistakes and so on. So there's that. So you pick the principles, and then you start designing. So very briefly, I'm going to show you the steps I take teams through. I'm sure all of you know what each step is like, so I'm not going to dwell on them. Let's see. The first one, who is going to manage the list of outcomes? So the outcomes are, again, how we make a difference, right? The value of the work. Who's going to be managing this, sequencing it, and so on? If you did Scrum, you would call that person product owner. In the particular case you're in, it could be anyone. Okay, but these are outcomes. They're not deliverables. Deliverables are the next step. This, again, if you did Scrum, this would be your product backlog. So how you would accomplish those outcomes. So maybe an outcome, let's say for a finance team, One outcome that their customers, the managing directors, have is to not overspend their conference budgets or training budgets or whatever. And you can say a deliverable for this will be, I don't know, a conversation, a 5-minute conversation once a month, or a brief report, or a system that they can pull current data from, or whatever, right? All for the same outcome. But this is the sequence. So who's going to manage the deliverables? Who is even going to determine what the deliverables are? Again, if you did Scrum, the answer would typically be a combination of PO and delivery team. But again, in this case, it could be something else. Breaking work down. So how would you break work down for your kind of work? So in the case of software, we have typical ways of doing this, and we talk about partitioning stories and this and that. It might be different. It might be different in this case. Some people outside of software have a more linear process, and so there's a limit to what you can really do there. But we're looking for things that are kind of bite-sized. This is the type of stuff that you might find on a sprint backlog. This is the things that take a couple of days, maybe, because this is what we want to get to flow with, right? Now, I know from software teams that breaking work down is among the hardest skills, and it takes time. So what I like to do at this point is just get some practice. Not to sweat it too much, but just get some practice so people understand it. Next, you need to define done for those small items. And the next step will be to design the workflow that items go through. Now, you might start them off with a to-do, doing, done, which is like the simplest workflow ever. You might do something a bit more elaborate, like to-do, doing, reviewing, done. Don't overdo this, because you know that the administration overhead of managing a board can be a deterrent. So don't overdo this. This will evolve through continuous improvement, so don't worry about it too much. As long as you have the start and the finish done, like 3 and 4, that's a good start. Here's something that does not come up in software. In software, we're extra transparent and we share everything. Not in HR, not in finance, not in other functions where some things are confidential. So you need to decide how to deal with those. There's several ways to do this. It's not a big deal, but it has to be said. Next, you do the visualization. So how will this appear? And just so you know, outside of software, they've also heard of Jira. And I tell them don't, because start using paper, because this is going to evolve. You don't need, oh, wow, lots of hands waving here. Careful, Isaac, don't hurt yourself. This will evolve so quickly. You don't want the pain of data migration as you go. And besides, if it's in a tool, out of sight, out of mind. If a team is distributed, well, do something else, maybe in Trello. How will they constrain intake? So that's effectively limiting work in progress. Now, I don't know who among you has tried to explain limiting WIP to people. Most people think it's crazy, because it's like, how can we do less work and be more productive? So if they don't really constrain intake at this point, I don't sweat it. But once they start suffering the consequences, then we'll talk about it. But it's good to kind of, sow the seeds and say, let's not be like the highway at rush hour. Well, let's try that. How will they get feedback? During the work, just before they think it's done, and after it's done. And this does not imply a demo meeting. A demo meeting is a very expensive solution for, again, big team, one product, busy stakeholders and whatever. It might not apply here, but get your feedback. How, right? A conversation about what's potentially an impediment. And it's comical how a lot of things that they consider normal, or we would consider impediments, this is the time to point out why that is, right? So if you send an email to somebody and you wait a week for an answer, that might be normal, but it's not cool. So we don't want this, and here's why, and what can we do about it? So this is the time to just kind of list out what could potentially get in the way and how we might deal with it. And it's like, it's setting off on an adventure. How will they deliver stuff? And team touch points. Again, just to show you how different this is than what you would get if you just did plain old Scrum. Like, Scrum, clearly you start with the meetings. Everybody has them. And for me, it's the last step. So you do need team touch points. And if they don't want to call them meetings, call them something else. I know Scrum calls them events, doesn't matter. Huddles, right? But these are touch points. And I like to have two, maybe three. One is the equivalent of sprint planning or queue replenishment. So basically making sure that the small items list has things for the upcoming few days. Another one is a retrospective, which doesn't have to happen on the same cadence as anything else, but just do it frequently enough. And another touch point, if applicable, if necessary, if they don't sit together, is some sort of, like equivalent of the daily. So some equivalent of the daily stand-up, so they actually communicate. If they already communicate a lot, I don't know that I would bother. We'll see. Because seriously, one of the concerns, I didn't point this out earlier, but one of the concerns is too many meetings, and we don't want to dump more meetings on people. Okay, so there's that. You need to structure the team. The usual considerations apply as you would in software development. You do want to consider that some people will not work together well. There will be skill gaps. There's the matter of availability and so on. Here's one thing I do want to recommend is don't lean on them to work in an open space. And I know this often happens. We get a team and we're ready to start. And okay, now let's find a place to sit together. And people are, does that mean I have to give up my desk? And we don't want that because people will feel a sense of loss if you relocate them. So what I think is, let them be. If they communicate and collaborate and find ways to make it work, fine, be with it, just roll with it. And when you see an opportunity to suggest moving in together and it's not going to be painful, bring it up then. At least give them a room for their, touch points. So this is the last one. I think almost the last one. We also need to define roles and responsibilities. Again, I don't necessarily like starting with roles because let's face it, some of the established roles don't fit every context. So here's a solution. You make a list of all the current responsibilities, all the stuff that needs doing, and they know that, right? It's their life. So just make a list. Add the stuff in the bullet points because this is all the stuff we know from Agile that we need, right? And these are not obvious responsibilities. And then we simply identify a home for each. That's the picture you have there on the right. That's a team that's basically decided who's going to be doing what. That's self-organization for you, right? If they struggle or there's some obvious baggage and some people are obviously like managers and such, then we might, for instance, say, okay, the last 4, yeah, that's usually somebody like a team leader. Okay, fine. But don't necessarily start with roles and force fit the team into the roles. Instead, make sure that the responsibilities have a home. Okay, and the last one, what happens during the first few months? So all of you who are coaches, you know that the first few months are sensitive, sometimes risky. Here are the things I pay attention to. Start them off with a kickoff. Even if everybody participated in the design, which is unlikely due to schedules, at least catch people up. Anytime people are wondering, what does the process say? Should we X or should we Y? I say, I don't care, just finish it together. So I like to give them a mantra because otherwise people sweat the process too much. Make working agreements, always good idea. Stabilize the system, you get lots of really good ideas from Kanban. Number 5, everybody who's coached even one day will relate to that one. Definitely reflect and improve frequently. So definitely have something either informal or formal, but every couple weeks, every week, something like that. Very much about intentional leadership. So at this point, I think they're harmful. All I want to know is you have decided to follow certain principles. Are you actually doing that, right? Are you actually experimenting with that? And what's the effect been? What's good, what's bad? Metrics, if you want them, will come later. So that's that, right? That's that. Step 10, which we're not covering today, has to do with expanding Agile. We're not there yet.
That's excellent, Gil. Wow, these are just so good. And we've been monitoring the chat, and there have been a lot of very positive comments on just how helpful this is and that this is spot on with where I think a lot of our experience has been And
Mm-hmm.
you saw me nodding along, very much resonating what you were saying with my experience. So we've got some Q&A. If you want to take a couple of questions here, maybe you can help us clarify a few
Yeah,
areas.
please.
Okay, great. Okay,
Yeah.
so coming from the Slido, the top voted one had 2 votes going up there, and you can still go to the Slido. Our link's over in the chat if you want to add or upvote questions as we go through this. After going through this process, and this came in early in the session, going through that process of kind of discovering the why with
Mm-hmm.
the company, have you ever had anyone say, no, thank you, this is too hard, right? When you kind of line out what they're going to do as they transform. Have you ever had anyone say that? Are you there, Gil?
Um,
Oh.
Not in this many words, but I have had people, yes, it's a media company, and they said the first thing we have to deal with is people don't collaborate around here. Let's deal with that first. So I gave them a workshop, and they're doing some cross-functional collaboration, whatever, not Agile yet. Might not happen for a while. Who knows?
Gotcha. Yes. Okay. Awesome. So then how long does the process take? Is it normally one meeting or is it multiple meetings?
Oh, yeah, I should have said that.
Mindset?
Yeah, I should have said that. It's multiple meetings. It can actually take months, but it's not a daily thing, right? So, to step 8 there, where you design your initial way of working, that can take a day, 2 meetings of 2 to 3 hours each, maybe. Yes, it's yeah, it is not contiguous.
Awesome. All right. And then who needs to be involved in challenging and making the decisions around beliefs? Is it the teams, leaders? What level? Who do you want to have in that room when you're having that meeting?
So everyone who matters, and so the team and the manager. I would love to see a more senior manager than the one who asked for Agile. And that's because quite often those values and beliefs, they are they have impact and effect across the organization, right? So those are no choices that you should be making on your own. Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. And then what do you do when their beliefs, you had the list of beliefs and you would narrow them down to 3? What would you recommend doing if, say, those beliefs were a mix-up of 2 different systems? So say, they picked one belief from Agile, one belief from Waterfall, and said, these are the 2 most important things. How would you maybe help them reconcile that?
Okay, so a couple of things there. One is there's values and beliefs. The values is the list that you really should keep short, because these are the things you're going to say, this is the important stuff, this is our North Star. Beliefs, you can have more. The beliefs are their backdrop, right? They're backdrop to how you approach things, but they don't have the same effect. They give values, validity and context. You might well end up with a mix. And actually, that was part of the point of this example. It is likely that you will end up with a mix. And if that's the case, you pick principles that support what you picked. And is that a hybrid? By all means, it's a hybrid. And I don't mind hybrids. What I do mind for hybrids is when people hybridize practices. And that makes no sense because the practices come from different mindsets that don't align. Okay. So for instance, like what these guys said here, they said, let's plan each deployment. The way they plan each deployment is equivalent to a Gantt chart, right? You show Gantt charts to Agilists and they break out in hives. But for them, it makes sense, right? Will it kind of go away with time, with automation? Probably, right? Should. But until that happens, to plan a deployment is the sensible thing to do.
Excellent. That's a great answer. Thank you. So I've got one more question just came in for you, and I think it's a really great question to wrap up our Q&A session with. The change process often progresses with no way to evaluate success, right? It's kind of in the background. What has worked well for you in evaluating progress towards some objective?
So we pick our values because we think they'll help us accomplish certain outcomes. That was the motivation that we started with. So you need to assess, and sometimes those are lagging indicators. You need to assess whether you're doing better on business outcomes, whatever they happen to be. Okay. So what I said first is, first assess that you're actually using what you said you would use, and then try to see what the effect of it is. Often it will be qualitative, and that's okay. If you can develop metrics that don't have side effects, and there's like in the book, there's like several pages on why metrics cause a lot of agilists to break up in hives, because that can create a lot of tension. Okay, and sometimes just assessing qualitatively and say, things are generally better than before, and we don't seem to be having like major side effects. Go for it, right? We often talk about assessing and measuring, and quite often our client's starting point is that they don't measure anything to begin with. So why should they measure Agile? So just to remind everyone, so there's that spreadsheet. If you want a notification when the book comes out, again, it's not my general mailing list. That if you want, you can go on anytime. I'll let you know when it comes out. Yeah, I'm very excited about this. When I wrote the first one, I never imagined there'd be a second. When I wrote the second, I thought that was it, right? And here we are.
Thank you. And when did you say it was going to be ready?
In a month or so. I don't do deadlines, so I don't know exactly. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. So we have a few minutes left. I just wanted to share, I am going to share my screen, Gil, so that's going to stop your sharing.
Sure.
Let's see. Let's see if it works. Everybody see my screen? So I wanted to share really briefly before we close out for today. There's a couple events coming up. One is our very first official Coaching Agile Journeys virtual lean coffee, and that's October 14th, so 1 week from today at this exact time, 12 o'clock Eastern time. We'd love if you can join us for our lean coffee and talk about anything you wish. And the next one after that is Lisa Cooney with Unconscious Bias. So I saw her talk at Lean Agile US in February last year, and she's coming on to Coaching Agile Journeys to do her talk on unconscious bias. And of course, I always recommend you go to openleadershipnetwork.com and check out the trainings there, and join us when we talk about the future of work and open leadership. And there's all kinds of things coming up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Any last, Gil, any last events that you want to share coming up? Any trainings or things that you want to share before we close out today?
Sure. So I teach a course called Practical Agile Leadership. So that's 2 days for leaders, typically managers and directors, RTs, program managers, on how to lead in an agile fashion, again, without prescription, without certification. I don't do that. So there's one coming up in Boston and a surprise one in Toronto in December. So that's 2 days, comprehensive exploration, no slides.
Awesome.
Thank you.
For sharing, and thanks for coming on Coaching Agile Journeys, and hope to see you around, Gil. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Gil.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.